The afternoon downpour sent everyone scrambling for shelter in the small town of Port Antonio. Some packed into shops, while others huddled beneath the colonnade outside the row of shops. Inside the betting shop, customers crowded together, placing bets and buying lottery tickets. The air carried the scent of dampness, ganja smoke, and faint rum, while rain washed the streets clean outside. Suddenly, people began edging away as a rain-soaked man wandered into the shop. His slippers made soft flip-flop sounds against the wet floor as muddy water pooled around his feet. "Where do you think you're going?" the cashier shouted from behind the counter. "Get out of the shop, dirty madman!" The man stood frozen near the counter, clutching a small, clear plastic bag containing 3 crumpled Jamaican bills, while the other customers edged away, glaring at him with open disgust. The man covered his nose dramatically. "Don't you hear what the lady said?" he said coldly. "Get out. You smell too bad to be around decent people." "I just want to buy a super lotto," the man said timidly. The cashier shook her head. "I don't want your filthy money." The man near the back laughed. "What do you need a lotto ticket for? You already lost your mind." Loud laughter came immediately after. Another customer muttered, "Get out and go bathe and change your dirty clothes, man." The man lowered his eyes. His tattered clothes clung to his body, soaked through by the rain. Dirty water dripped from his unkempt hair. He carried a strong, lingering odor like something decaying. Still, he clutched the small, clear plastic bag containing the money. "One ticket," he whispered again. Then a man shoved him. "Hard. Move from here, man." The man stumbled backwards as laughter rippled through the shop. That was when a beautiful young woman near the door spoke. "Leave him alone," she said. The shop fell silent. She stepped forward slowly, a grocery bag hanging from her hand. Raindrops still clung to the loose curls around her face. "He's a human being, just like the rest of us." The cashier shifted uneasily. "Miss, can't you see he's mad?" "That doesn't give you the right to treat him like garbage," she replied. But she kept looking directly at him, not at his filthy clothes, not at the smell, not at the madness people saw. She looked at him. For the first time in a long while, someone looked at him without disgust. He looked at her with exhausted eyes before walking out of the shop. As he passed beneath the colonnade, people recoiled and stepped out of his way in disgust. But the woman who had stood up for him could not bring herself to let him leave without getting his ticket. She turned and hurried after him. "Hey!" she called out. "Stop!" He stopped and turned slowly. The woman stepped closer without a trace of disgust in her eyes. "If you trust me," she said quietly, "I'll buy the ticket for you." The people beneath the colonnade stared at her with curiosity and confusion. Then the man said something nobody there would ever forget. "I would have to trust you with my heart before I could trust you with my future," he muttered. The young woman froze. Suddenly, the madness people mocked sounded different. Not foolish, not empty, broken, painfully broken. A gentle smile touched her face. "You can trust me," she said softly. The man stared at her for several long seconds before nodding slowly. Then, with complete seriousness, he asked, "If we win, would you stay with me for the rest of my life?" The entire colonnade erupted with laughter, loud enough to draw the attention of people inside the nearby shops. "Listen to the madman," someone jeered. "Pure madness," another shouted. But the young woman did not laugh. Something in his voice stopped her. Not romance, loneliness, the kind that made even impossible dreams sound sincere. So she smiled softly and answered playfully, "Yes, I will." The man smiled. Then he began listing numbers. 7, 14, 19, 26, 4 for the Super Bowl. She repeated them as she keyed them into her phone. "You need one more regular number," she said. The man looked at her with strange intensity. "You choose the final number. Let fate decide our future," he said. Laughter rippled beneath the colonnade again, but the young woman suddenly felt uneasy. He handed her the small, clear plastic bag containing 3 crumpled $100 bills, as though he were handing over millions. She took the money and walked back into the betting shop. As she filled out the ticket, random numbers raced through her mind. 12, 28, 32. Unable to decide, she sighed and looked up. A large poly lizard suddenly darted across the concrete ceiling overhead. Her eyes widened slightly. 31. Everybody in Jamaica knew it. Lizard meant 31. A strange chill crept through her body as she stared at the paper. Her fingers hovered over the final space, refusing to move. Slowly, she wrote the number down. The moment the ink touched the paper, unease twisted through her thoughts. What if all his numbers played except the one she chose? Her eyes drifted towards the man waiting outside, staring at her as though his entire future rested in her hands. Suddenly, his words no longer sounded harmless. Let fate decide our future. A knot tightened in her stomach. Would he blame her if her number cost him the full jackpot? Or worse, would he kill her? The laughter around her suddenly felt distant. The rain, the people, the noise from the street, all of it faded beneath the weight of a terrifying thought settling into her mind. Or what if he hits the jackpot? What if this strange, broken man truly believed she belonged to him now? For a brief moment, fear crept into her mind. If these numbers win, he may hold me to my word. She bought the ticket, slipped it inside the small plastic bag, stepped back outside, and handed it to the man. He accepted it without checking, as though she had already earned his full trust. He gave her one last smile before setting off. While people laughed and jeered, she watched him disappear down the wet street, hunched beneath the steady drizzle. Nobody beneath that colonnade or inside the shop knew who the man really was. He was Peter Taylor from St. Thomas, the neighboring parish of Portland. A year earlier, he had graduated from university with a degree in business administration. After 3 years of study, he believed a respectable and highly paid career was finally within reach. Instead, he stepped into a world changing faster than he could adapt to. Companies were replacing entry-level analysts and consultants with AI systems and cheap software subscriptions. The jobs he had spent years preparing for began disappearing almost overnight. At first, he remained optimistic. He rewrote his resume countless times, applied everywhere, practiced interviews, learned new software. He kept telling himself persistence would eventually pay off. But months passed without progress. Then the student loan payments began. Interest accumulated relentlessly while the cost of living rose around him. Rent increased, groceries became expensive, electricity bills climbed higher every month. Soon, every morning began with anxiety. He checked his banking app before getting out of bed. He avoided opening emails because most contained rejection notices, overdue balances, or payment reminders. Sleep became shallow and fragmented. Even at rest, his nervous system remained tense. First came exhaustion, then overthinking, then shame. He stopped replying to friends because every conversation reminded him that other people's lives were moving forward while his remained stagnant. Social media became unbearable. Success stories felt like personal attacks. Under constant stress, his concentration deteriorated. Simple tasks became mentally draining. Sometimes he opened job applications and stared blankly at the screen for an hour, unable to focus long enough to complete them. The pressure changed how he saw himself. At university, he had felt intelligent, ambitious, capable. Now he felt obsolete. Like the future had arrived and quietly decided he was unnecessary. Eventually, his sleep collapsed completely. Days blurred together. His appetite disappeared. Some afternoons he sat motionless for hours, replaying financial calculations inside his head. Debt, rent, interest, failure. Over and over. Slowly, Peter stopped imagining a future at all. And once hope disappeared, his mind began turning against itself. Then he became ill. People said it was obia. Friends visited. Family members supported him. Church members prayed over him. But nothing changed. Peter stopped speaking sensibly, stopped bathing, stopped sleeping. Bills piled up around him while he sat alone inside a dark room, listening to his own thoughts mock him. Sometimes he stared at the ceiling until sunrise without realizing the entire night had passed. Anxiety became despair. Despair became isolation. Isolation slowly consumed his mind. Eventually, he lost the rented house, then reality itself. The streets finished destroying whatever dignity he had left. People threw rocks at him for entertainment. Teenagers recorded videos of him weeping openly in the streets and laughed as they posted them online. Their cruelty eventually drove him out of Morant Bay, but the people of Port Antonio treated him no differently. Since insanity had claimed his mind, the young woman buying his lottery ticket was the first act of kindness he had received. That night, Peter sat beneath the canopy of an abandoned wooden shop, surrounded by darkness. He listened as the lottery draw drifted through the open window of a nearby house, the sound carrying from a television inside. Waves rolled steadily against the shore while cars moved slowly through the dark streets. Inside the nearby house, voices rose with laughter and excited shouts. Then, the announcer began reading numbers. 7. Peter slowly lifted his head. 14. His breathing changed. 19. Now his hands trembled. 26. People inside the house screamed with excitement over partial matches. Then came the final number. 31. Silence. Then Super Bowl. 4. Peter stepped beneath the streetlight and reached slowly into the pocket of his tatty trousers. His fingers trembled violently as he pulled the ticket from the small plastic bag. Once, twice, 3 times he checked. 31. For several seconds, he could not breathe. Then tears rolled down his face. His knees nearly buckled beneath him. Because after nearly a year of sleeping on sidewalks, eating leftovers from garbage bins, foraging for fruits, and hearing voices in the darkness, tomorrow finally existed again. And in that exact moment, standing beneath the streetlight with a winning lottery ticket trembling in his hands, the noise inside his mind began to quiet for the very first time. He smiled through tears, lifted his hands towards the heavens, and whispered, "Almighty God, I thank you." Weeks later, people in Port Antonio began noticing a sleek black car with dark-tinted windows gliding through the town. Nobody knew who was inside. Whenever the car rolled past or pulled up along the roadside, women suddenly found reasons to make themselves noticeable. Some adjusted their hair, others smiled boldly at the windows, hoping for attention from the mysterious wealthy man inside. Sometimes the car parked outside the betting shop. Even the cashier who had once shouted at the madman began stepping outside to pose nearby, secretly hoping the owner would notice her. Then one afternoon, the young woman who had bought the lottery ticket walked along Love Lane where the black car was parked for nearly an hour. Suddenly, the driver's door swung open. A well-groomed man dressed in designer clothes stepped out and hurried after her. People nearby immediately stopped to watch. "Hey, hey," he called. The woman glanced back briefly, then frowned and kept walking. She knew the type. Rich men with polished smiles who chased women for temporary pleasure. She had no interest in men like that. But the stranger continued after her. "Please," he called again between breaths. "Wait." His voice carried something unexpected. Not arrogance, desperation. Finally, as he caught up beside her, he gently touched her shoulder. "I can tell you don't recognize me," he said breathlessly. She pulled back slightly, suspicion hardening her expression. "Who are you?" The man stared at her in disbelief for a moment. Strange, he thought. The woman who had shown compassion to a disheveled man now looked at a well-dressed man of means with caution and disdain. "I've been looking for you for weeks," he said after taking a steady breath. She remained silent. Then he smiled faintly. "I'm the same man you bought the lottery ticket for." Her eyebrows tightened in confusion. "The man," he continued quietly, "outside the betting shop that rainy afternoon." Suddenly, her expression changed completely as realization hit her. Her hand rose slowly to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. "What happened to you?" He smiled, but there was pain behind it. "Didn't you check the numbers?" She stared at him speechlessly. "We won," he said. The woman stumbled back slightly, overwhelmed. Her mind struggled to connect the broken man beneath the colonnade with the composed stranger standing before her now. "No," she whispered faintly. Peter reached slowly into his wallet and pulled out the winning receipt. The numbers stared back at her. $375 million. Her knees weakened. Peter noticed immediately and gently steadied her before she could fall. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at him differently now, not because of the money, but because of what she suddenly realized about his mind. "How did you come back from something like that?" Peter hesitated before answering. "The human mind is not built to remain in survival mode forever," he said quietly. "Chronic stress narrows thinking, weakens emotional control, damages concentration, and distorts perspective." He glanced away briefly before continuing. "Every day was fear, hunger, humiliation, failure. After enough suffering, the brain starts breaking under the weight of it." Silence settled between them. Then she finally understood something terrifying. On the day the entire town mocked him beneath that colonnade, she had not been looking at a stupid man or a worthless madman. She had been looking at someone whose mind had collapsed beneath unbearable suffering. And somehow, beneath all that pain and madness, a part of Peter had still survived. His faith. Even in his insanity, he still prayed quietly each night for deliverance, prosperity, and one day, a virtuous wife to share his life with. Peter looked at her solemnly. "God never gives a faithful man more than he can bear," he said softly. "I can now attest to the power of prayer." The woman nodded softly, as though his words had reached somewhere deep inside her. "You were the only person who treated me like I was still somebody," he continued. "After a while, you start believing the way people look at you." His voice cracked slightly. "Do you know what that does to someone who has been mocked, mistreated, and abandoned because of an unfortunate condition?" Tears rolled down the woman's face as she realized her small act of kindness had not only changed a life, it had reached a soul the world had nearly destroyed, and somehow life had rewarded her for seeing humanity where everyone else saw madness. "I could never truly understand what you went through," she said faintly. "Only the person carrying the pain truly knows it. Sometimes life takes us down roads no one ever hopes to walk." She looked deeply into his eyes. "Glory be to God," she whispered. "You have a testimony." Then she reached for his hand and held it firmly. The touch made his fingers clumsy, and the receipt slipped from his grasp. Peter bent down, picked it up carefully, then stood before her again with quiet resolve in his eyes. "Half of it is yours," he said softly. "And as for our little agreement about you staying with me forever," he smiled faintly, "that choice is entirely up to you." Tears shimmered in her eyes as she looked at him. This time, she was no longer looking at a broken stranger beneath a colonnade in the rain. She was looking at a man who had fought his way back from darkness. "Thank you," she whispered. Peter nodded gently. "No, thank you. You gave me hope when I had none left." A soft silence settled between them as the afternoon breeze moved through Love Lane. Then she laughed quietly. "You know something," she said. "We never even learned each other's names." A smile crossed his face. "My name is Peter." "Angelina," she replied softly. He repeated her name slowly, almost carefully. "Angelina." For a moment, neither of them moved. The noise of the town faded into the background while they simply stood there looking at each other. Then Peter reached gently for her hand. This time, she did not pull away. Some people later claimed it was faith that brought them together. Others believed it was Angelina's simple act of compassion beneath the colonnade that rainy afternoon. Perhaps it was both. Peter and Angelina soon became inseparable. They became friends quickly and lovers slowly. And whenever Peter looked at her, there was always something unspoken in his eyes, as though she had been heaven sent to find him at the edge of darkness and love him patiently back into the light. And years later, after marriage, children, and a life neither of them could have imagined the first time they met, Peter still kept a framed replica of the winning lottery check hanging inside their home. Because to him, it was never just the ticket that changed his life. It was his faith and the woman God had sent to see a human being where the rest of the world saw madness. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change the life of a broken person. The cruel world never cared enough to understand. And with faith, even as small as a mustard seed, even the darkest life can find light again. If you enjoyed this story by Troy Mackenzie, don't just like, subscribe, and comment. Share it. That's how word, sound, and story reaches further and grows stronger. I appreciate your support.